All right, we're live.
Why don't you, before you record, right? Why don't you just do a test, like hit
I
record,
already
and then
did.
we like, oh, okay, cool.
Anyways, I just recorded, so we'll start. I mean, worst case, I'll edit the first few parts. But, um, hello, people listening to this podcast. I am Vanguard. Here with a bunch of other people here, so we can talk about Vanguard. And something that you guys don't have to use your eyes to watch. Just listen to us talk, mumble about Vanguard. Uh, Everyone want to say hi?
Hello.
Howdy.
What's going on?
All right. Let's see. Let's do a short intro. I guess like the preferred name that you guys want to use on the podcast. And this format that you guys play, and then decks like you like to play. We can start with
You could go on the list in Discord.
Sure.
Yeah, that'll work.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hey, how's it going, guys? Domino Paris 21 here, and been playing Vanguard for since 2012 when it first came here to EN or to North America, and I've had some hiatuses here and there, but after about 5 years now of being out of the game, kind of getting back into the thick of things and enjoying myself so far. So yeah, glad to be here.
You can go ahead, Mark. I'll go after you.
Sure, that'll work. Hello everyone. My name is Mark. I have been playing since set 0, good old TD1, Blasters and Overlord. Took a pretty extended hiatus till about 2018. Then shortly after that, another hiatus to 2021 when we got deformat. Been playing pretty consistently ever since. Yeah. Play mostly premium, a little bit of standard. Great Nature is the greatest clan in the history of mankind, and Bushy Road refuses to make it good.
Go ahead.
And I am Simon. I have been playing since the half decks came over to English, and my favorite card is Blaster Plate. Big surprise. And I have not taken any breaks in the game since it came out, so I've been consistently playing at least. And for the most part, I have been there to see the rise and fall of every single format of Vanguard, and I hate Bushi Road. But they make my favorite card game, so abusive relationships don't participate.
How it is, man.
Guess it's my turn. As you know, I am Vanguard, the main host of the podcast. The formats I play, I do play standard mostly. I have one deck for premium, just because I hate the format at the moment. I just played the worst deck possible, so everyone hates me. I play Ghidorah for premium. Let's see, standard. I play a bunch of different decks right now, but right now I'm really into Dark State Nations and Stochea Nations. I guess we can kind of go on here. The recent top decks in Japan and thoughts. I think Simon had a list for us that we can kind of go off by the recent
Sure.
top decks in Japan. Set 5 just got released, right?
Yep.
Yes, it should have released 2 weeks ago, I believe.
Yeah, we're already getting results from there.
Beautiful set 5. We love to see it.
So kind of going off the list. This is like for locals, I believe, from Freedom Duo.
Yes, the Freedom Duo blog that I posted for us, those are all gathered from their locals in the Tokyo area, I believe.
I was gonna say I do see a lot of Liels on the numbers that you have. 16 Liels, 10 King Levy decks, 11 King Raziel decks, 5 Night Rose, 5 Blankdemires, 2 Luar, 2 Dolls, 2 Impaldio, and 2 Vargas. Surprisingly 2 Vargas. I was actually expecting a little more.
That is surprising. My personal opinion on that, I think it's because Varga's deck is really linear, and even though it's really, really strong in the local area, either A, people may or may not be playing it, but who cares? It's locals, you play whatever you want, even if it's pretty strong. I think it's because B, there's a lot more defensive options that have come out in the game, especially with set 5 coming out. And Varga's strategy is still linear. It's just an upgrade to its original deck, and people have started figuring out strategies with new defensive options coming out to be able to weather out that turn.
I
Yeah.
think people are just bored of Varga. Like Varga, like
I
rescanning
think that's the
Vanguards,
case.
like they're very linear, straightforward decks. And even myself being an all-time Overlord player, I've always played restanding Vanguards or
Yeah.
like just some cheesy pressure in the middle Vanguard. And after a while, they become very linear and mundane. And I think like in shops, sometimes in locals, sometimes I don't want to play those decks. I want to play something that's a little bit more enticing or something that's more stimulating to play. But I think when it comes to game time, like playing like in a I don't know like a case tournament, BCS, I'm gonna just play Varga. Like I'm gonna play the best deck.
Yeah.
So I think it's a mix of that.
I think another part of it, right, is that I think the Venn diagram for Leio players and the Venn diagram for Varga players is probably like really close to a circle. And also like the new Varga, I think, is not intuitive to play. Where like the original Varga, right? You're just like, okay, you do the thing, you slam the card, you do the da, you turn the card sideways. But I think the newer Varga, there's a lot of nuance to it because you lose a couple of the cards that allow you to draw on your turn as well. So you're losing a little bit of that draw power that lets you keep a relatively large hand size when you're able to pressure your opponent as well. So I think that those two are a big part of it. Uh, I'm also not sold on the new Varga. I think that it's really good looking, but I'm not sold that that is a good deck to build around.
I lean in with Mark on that personally. Like, I think my big problem with Varga decks is that they lose so much of their gas after their divine turn. And I feel like that was built into it, right? Because it holds the same problems that the old Varga deck did. And even though it clears the entire field, right, that you only get as much value as your opponent gives you.
Mm-hmm.
And we have so many decks that just refresh their field efficiently, or they just don't field in the first place and give you really efficient front row attacks or just the center column. And a lot of the time, it turns out, like you were saying earlier, Mark, a lot of Varga's game strategy comes from you trading better than them. Like,
Yep.
you draw back one of your cards for losing a card, whereas they just lose their Guardians.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think a really big part of that is just, better defensive options give us more value. Varga tries to diminish the opponent's value, but
Yeah.
the better our defensive options become, that's when Varga starts seeing more and more weakness.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think it's like it reminds me back like basically like Kagero as a clan I always say has been like an all-time fairly overrated by the public because on paper you would think all the retiring that they've accumulated over the years, which was their main essential strategy, would keep them in the meta, but then the meta will then shift around that to where either the units that you retire on the board either were just called for free for like a lot of value by your opponent, so they don't even care about losing their board, or the kind of like what Simon brought up. There's not a lot of value trading with retiring an entire board, or a lot of times now there may be more decks that are very Vanguard centric as well, to where they don't value their rear guards as much, and there's not as much counterplay being the Varga player to that. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and the restanding Vanguard, because a big thing too with it being a restanding Vanguard, I always call it like a pseudo restander because other than the divine skill,
Yep,
you're
and
only
the
getting two
power
drive
is
checks.
flat, you're
Because back in the
right.
day, at least,
Yeah.
oh for sure, and like it's more predictable because a restanding Vanguard, one of the most powerful pressuring parts of a restander is the second drive checks. But if you're not getting that, you become a little bit more
You're
predictable to
you're a
play around. If
glorified
you don't
rearguard
hit
at
your
that
crit, then
point. Your Vanguard
Yeah.
just
yeah,
becomes a
basically.
rearguard attack.
I think
Yeah,
another
basically.
part of it, right, is that if you look at the list, right, we've got King Levidrus, we've got King Rezael, Liel, and Night Rose are like the biggest ones. The thing that
Value,
all those
value,
decks have in
value.
common is not just that they have value, right? But all of those decks, the support cards are built around you don't need to have them anymore, right? Like the thing about Rezael is that even if you have an empty hand, Rezael still lets you call at least two cards, right? So even if you lose your board, you still have the inevitability. Levidrus, you just pop the two 10Ks in the front row of your opponent, and all of a sudden their offensive power is like way more diminished than it was before. So with the format the way it is, I don't think that Varga is well positioned in set 5 if the format is going to be what we're seeing now with like Liel, Levidrus, and Rezael. because of the way that those decks interact with Varga in a negative way. And the Varga set 5 didn't get a good enough support card that makes it better. The card calls itself to the back row and does basically nothing else. Like, it's not a card that is making it so that you want to use it. It's a very bizarre card. I'm not a big fan of it. Let me find Storm Slasher Dragon.
Yeah, the one that's like it calls back to rest and then it restands for a soul
Yeah,
blast.
but
Yeah.
only if your Vanguard's in the Malworm state. So you have your main support card is a turn 4 card at the earliest. And the thing about Varga that was so good is in set 1, and David remembers this because I played against David, I am Vanguard himself. The thing about I did in Varga in set 1 is that I played 0 heals. I played 8 crits, 7 fronts, 1 OT, because the whole thing about Varga in set 1 is that you just need to kill your opponent as fast as possible, because you can trade up, sure, like you can do the trades, but if your opponent literally can never get anywhere off of the back foot, you're not losing the game. Yep. Because if your opponent's at 4 damage on your turn 3 and you're going second, they're dead. There's no way for them to survive it as long as they don't obviously hit over trigger, but that's a whole other topic. But like, now that all the other decks can catch up, and now that Varga's new form is a turn 4 at the earliest card, you're kind of like, maybe it might work. And the support card is a grade 1 that you can't use until your turn 4. Like, what are we doing? This is like not a way to keep Varga relevant in the meta.
They're slowing down the deck.
Yeah,
It
slowing down
becomes
the
an
deck doesn't
Impale
make it
Horn.
better.
It's like actually a worse Impale Horn, because Impale Horn at least you boost with the second, and it actually boosts a little bit higher than the other card, and plus it lets you draw as well, so it lets you to kind of extend your hand a little bit. This one, it just seems more like a win more card to overextend a little bit, to maybe even boost Shura as well. But at that point, I mean, like you kind of have dead cards for the early game, and I think like with Varga, it's been built more to, I guess, be a better late game card, but I think it's just more of just making it more mundane, and it's really matchup dependent. If you face the right matchups in the right situations, it's great, but you know, I just think that because the meta, I think metas in Vanguard is always based around the control oriented decks. Like if you can't play, if decks can't play around it, then it dominates. But once the meta changes and there's support to kind of dance around all of that, or kind of like I think what you said, Mark, the units you call out, you get value out of them. So they've already did their job. They can leave. So like they can come off the board. It doesn't matter. You just replace it with something else for value. So you're not really getting a good trade as the Varga player.
So I was gonna say, actually for Simon, I don't know if you have like something pulled up for set 5, but what does briefly I mean, I know what they do, but for the people listening, what does the new Varga do, and the new Levy and the new Res? And Lyrio, obviously.
Pulled up right now.
Leo, actually. I think that'll be something nice.
Yeah, you can have Mark go off on that.
Yeah, I think that'll be something nice. Yeah.
Starting with Varga, right? Unparalleled Dreckschlief, Varga Dragras Rakshasha. Malworm Auto. When this unit is placed by riding on a unit with Varga in its different card name from this unit or from a unit in the Malworm state until the end of this fight, this unit is in the Malworm state. And if Persona Ride was not activated by this ride, activate Persona Ride. Pretty simple stuff. It's basically the same ability that Leonorn had with the Unison Dress. Then we have...
It's just a dress up. It's just a dress up.
Auto Vanguard once per turn. When this unit in the Malworm state attacks a Vanguard, retire all front row rear guards, and this unit gets power 10,000 until the end of turn. At the end of that battle, cost Counterblast 1, retire all back row rear guards, stand this unit, and it gets drive -2 until the end of turn. And then I'll go over the Divine Skill. It's the same one as original Varga, except it cuts out the grade 3 clause. Divine Skill, Auto, Vanguard. At the end of the battle this unit attacked, if this unit stand by its original auto ability this turn, cost Counterblast 1, stand this unit, and it gets drive +2 until the end of turn. So the key difference here with this Varga, and this is important for anyone who's listening to know, the Divine Skill can only be activated once per game. By any card, if you activate Varga's original Divine Skill, you cannot activate Rakshasha's Divine Skill. So you are locked into one activation of a divine skill per game. You cannot activate
This
any
actually This actually goes into what you were mentioning earlier as well, Mark. Because, like you were saying, like Varga has turned into a double grade 3 deck effectively. It's turned into a turn 4 deck versus a turn 3 deck, which it had
Yep.
access to. And so now that if you choose to play the new foil that you mentioned that comes back from the drop zone on retire, you effectively slow down your deck because it's name locked to the cross ride, right?
Yep.
Which means that you don't have these aggressive cards that it probably replaced earlier in the game, so you can't really prime your opponent like you generally would with normal Varga.
Yeah.
Because, in my opinion, it's like you were saying earlier, Varga's most powerful thing before Drake's Lissif was that it just slammed your hand and you started attacking, right? It was an all-in aggro, no holds barred kind of deck. But now that we have gotten new Varga, one, it takes an extra turn to get going, like you said. Two, the new foils or the new support happens later in the game, so it slows down effectively. And three, I think the critical thing is what you just mentioned. We only get to use one divine skill a game. It's how it's structured, right? And if you think your opponent is primed and ready, if you win second, you are going to divines them on original Varga. You're not going to wait for Drake's Lissif.
Yep. Absolutely.
But because like we all play Vanguard here, there's a lot of variance that happens in our game that we can't control. Or if they're holding a lucky perfect card that they blind drew earlier, if they have a bunch of these factors that can come together to stop your Divine's turn from winning, well, what does Drake's Lissif do?
Yeah.
In my opinion, it turns into a dead card in the deck. You on riding that versus normal Varga, killing the back row is cute. I think it's really quaint. It's a powerful ability. But what makes Varga powerful is the 4 drives and the 3 center attacks. After that's done, deck's got the same problem it always has. It has no more gas. And I think that's what's getting to it right now, because like you were saying before, we gave Varga slower cards, and in the same set, they gave us a bunch of more defensive cards and value cards.
Absolutely.
And we know what Bushi was trying to do here.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that one of the big things that Varga didn't address and has needed to have, right, since that one, and then I'll move on to the other two cards, is a countercharger. I have seen so many games where a Varga player is stuck on a vanilla turn because they do not have the ability to use a CB, or they lose their additional multi-attacks because they only have one CB. Varga has needed a countercharger, conditional or not, since set 1, and it hasn't gotten it yet, and this does not address any of the issues.
And for those of you who want to kill Varga, remember, this is how you kill Varga.
Damage denying is a real skill in Vanguard. Please don't diminish the importance of it.
Damage control is very important.
Absolutely. So I'll move on to
I'll take on the King Raziel for this one.
Sure, absolutely.
As the local KS player around here. You have the Fated King of Miracles, Raziel Vita, or Vita, depending on if you're Latin. So, its continuous ability, very powerful. It is regarded as the original Raziel in name, Fated One of Miracles, during your turn, and it gets +5 for each of the original Raziel in your soul, and it gains all of their divine skills. That is specifically because he doesn't have a divine skill on him. Now, his second ability is that when he attacks a Vanguard, you CB1, and you pick up to 2 cards from your drop with different grades, with total grades less than or equal to the number of cards in your damage zone, and call them to R, which is the same as his original. The kicker is that his new ability that goes on top of it is that you can put a grade 3 as a grade 3 card with Raziel in this name as a cost from your hand into soul, and then you pick a grade 3 or less card from your drop and call it to the rearguard circle. And if your opponent's if your opponent is grade 3 or higher, all the units called by that effect get power +5. My lead-in to this is that, one, it fixes, unfortunately, versus like, Drake's Lissif. Fated King fixes a lot of problems for Raziel, in the fact that a big thing that's missing from Raziel's like play style when it based around value is that you lack power. There's a lot of power that's tied to your rear guards, hopefully, to boost themselves up.
That's
and that sort of, holds back the value sort of avalanching the opponent. Because that is the magic recipe for value decks, as Vanguard has seen across the ages, is that when you start plussing with power, that's when things start getting a little out of hand.
Absolutely.
A good example is, we all remember it, Sanctuary Guard Stride Dragon.
Yeah, absolutely.
You
That's my
call out all of
my
your grade
baby
ones
right
for
there.
free.
Yep.
Yeah, right. You call out all your grade ones for free. They all get power +2, +5, and it's like, oh, it's off to the races.
Oh, and the stride
I,
that came out for it, ridiculous. But that's a story
oh
for a
yeah,
different day.
oh yeah. But Raziel sort of embodies that same value from Sanctuary Guard in a more fair way, let's say, because Raziel makes up for him not having a booster by buffing himself, and when he does have his primary booster, which is Aerial Sage, he just gets even better, right? Because Aerial Sage's big thing is that its 2k boost is tied to the discard, which is fair because countercharging is very rare for the divine units. Like, he's the only one that has it on his 13k booster, basically. Not to mention that you effectively get to call out two guys, even if they're low grades, like grade 1, if you're low damage. You still get to call out two guys, no matter what you do, which is just pure value. And then, as the game goes longer, Raziel's counterblast ability just keeps getting better until eventually you get to the point where you call out the grade 2 triple R that lets you scry the top of the deck for Energy Blast 3, or Gigantech Masher, which is its 28k beater. Those two on the front row, because I forgot to mention the G2 gets a +10 boost when called by a Raz. So you call those two guys, you use his effect to throw a Raz into Soul, boosts himself, calls out another dude from the drop zone to put behind the grade 2 to give it the magic number. They all get +5. You're just off to the races, right? It's like the longer the game goes on,
Absolutely.
the stronger Raziel becomes. Not to mention, its interaction with Caterpile, because it just gets to keep looping all of the expensive cards.
Yeah, and I mean, I
And
think.
then,
Do you want
go
to
ahead, Mark.
read
You're good.
Gabrielius as well?
Yeah, we can go over Gabrielius really quickly here
Yeah, I
as
think that's
well.
kind of very important to the
Mm-hmm.
new
No, yeah, I
Vanguard
was
team.
going to go
Yeah,
into
because
that on my next
that's
talking
a
point.
very key card.
Well, I was going to go into that on my next thing as well because of how he interacts with the Caterpile, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So, a really big thing about the Caterpile in Raziel is the fact that they have access to Biscotti, the strongest cycler, in my opinion. Biscotti's effect when it's called during a Persona Right turn is that she gets to scry the top 3 cards of the deck. So, and then you get to keep one on top. The kicker here is that you get to keep one on top, obviously. You get to start trigger filtering. Now, you look at Gabrielius, the new Gabrielius, Triple R, Counter Sanctuary, grade 3, 13k. His auto ability when placed on an R is that you Soul Blast 1, and you look at the top card of the deck and you put it to top or bottom. And you put it on bottom of the deck, he buffs himself by 5. Now, his other effect is that when he attacks, if your damage zone has 4 or more cards, aka Limit Break, until the end of that battle, he gets +5k. And if he was placed by the ability of your Vanguard with Faded One in its name, so Raziel and Original Liel, and no drive checks were performed for a rearguard battle that has attacked this turn, you CB1 and he buffs himself by 10k, minus his 1 drive, and then he performs drive check. So the big thing with Raziel is that with how Caterpile interacts with it, you start filtering your deck out of normal units, and then on your big go turns like Persona Ride, for example, you effectively, if all the pieces are set up, get to scry 4 cards. You get to buff your entire field by Raziel and Gabrielius coming down together. And then you just go off to the races with whatever you put on top of the deck. You effectively, with the triple drive Raziel gets in the Scry 4, you can effectively drive check 7 times to try and hit a trigger of some kind, which is absolutely absurd. It's absolutely absurd in D series.
I can definitely see why people are running Raziel in the local tournaments because it's a fun deck because you get the extra drive on the side too.
Yeah, I mean the thing that we talked about earlier is that the most powerful ability arguably that you can give a unit in Vanguard is the
His
ability to
drive.
drive
Yeah.
check.
Yep.
Or in adding their drive checks. Just because of how it's not game breaking necessarily, but it just changes the course of the game.
Yep. The one trigger
Um,
can change the
yeah,
course of the game, correct?
Especially
absolutely.
for guarding, right? Because a
Yeah.
lot of the times, like when numbers are flat, we know exactly what's going to happen. That's part of the low level Vanguard map that we do, right? Like 18k swinging to my dude 10k shield, whatever. It gets really, really fun and really risky and really salty when you start swinging at them and you go, okay, this is 28.
Yeah.
Okay, so 33 for one trigger? Wait, is that a rear guard? Yeah. My name is Bastion, also now Gobilius. It's like, oh god.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, dealing with a unit with a drive check, like especially when you think about in a high pressure situation, maybe you're in the finals, of a high leverage tournament, you care about winning, and you could be like sitting at 3 damage, and that could be the difference of just no guarding freely, or maybe someone panicking and burning their perfect guard because they don't want to get double critted or they're afraid of the triggers. And then even if you miss on the drive checks, it gets you 1 to 2 cards closer to, if you have your OT still in deck. Well, now you're 1 to 2 cards closer of compressing your deck a little bit more now.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep. That's
so
why extra drives are so dangerous in D series, is because the OT exists.
like just drive, like it seems like with D series, especially again for me, coming back into this game, I skipped all of overdress. I kind of stopped in the middle of V. So I think one thing that changed so much for me in D series, or now Divine series, I guess,
Yeah.
is deck compression is such a big thing, and I see a lot of decks oriented with like searching a lot from their decks, filtering through their decks, and there's a lot of deck compression so that they can basically accelerate the game to where you could start hitting your triggers more consistently and try getting games closed out. That's what I
Yeah.
feel.
Yep.
So the drive checks are really good.
Yeah, and I remember last year when they changed I guess earlier this year when they changed the deck construction rules. I am so happy that we
Yeah.
changed the deck construction rules.
250 and
Oh,
then the
yeah.
ride line being
This
separately.
format with a 46 card deck would be unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it
Um,
doesn't feel like a lot, right? Adding
Yeah.
4 cards into the deck, but in the minutia of math, it does help filter out sacky
Yeah.
checks like double trigger or OT
Absolutely.
and stuff like that. It really does help a lot.
Yeah.
It's also really helpful that they brought our crits down to a max of 8.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
fortunately,
that's
we can thank Lyrical Set 1 for that, because when Lyrical Set 1 came out, I don't know if you remember this, uh,
They got their third crit name.
they had 4 crits, I believe.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
because they
people
had
were
one for all
running-
the archetypes.
Yeah, there was 12 and even sometimes 16 crit Lyrical decks playing against, regular nations that only had 2 different types of critical triggers at the time. So they had to institute that rule, and now it's the biggest blessing in the world that they gave a bunch of lyrical decks each their own individual critical trigger, because if it wasn't for those lyrical decks, 16 crit Varga would be a deck, and I don't know if that's a format we want to play, even though the power level's been neutered quite
I
a
mean,
bit.
that's what I would have done so when I started joining, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's to say 12 crit Varga minimum.
Yeah, at least. At least.
No, what I was gonna say, one thing that really changed is the 8 crit limit, but also the ride line is definitely a huge change that I recognize. But I was gonna say we can probably save that topic towards later. I was gonna say I do want to kind of proceed on the other 2 decks that a lot of people are
Sure.
playing, which is the King Levy and the Liel decks, or I mean
Sure.
at least like what they do at least before we
Sure, yeah.
move on.
You can read off the King Levy dress mark.
Okay, sure. So King Lividris, continuous Vanguard skill. It's the same exact skill as Rezael. So it gets 5k for each Lividris and your soul, and it gets all their divine skills as well. Once per turn, Vanguard skill, counterblast 1, or put a card from hand into soul. Choose 2 of any player's rearguard circles and put an Infinity Eyes marker on them. If you put a grade 3 or greater card with Lividris in its card name, for this cost, choose 3 rearguard circles instead of 2. Auto Vanguard Circle. When any player's unit on a rearguard with your Infinity Eyes marker attacks or boosts, you may have that unit get power plus 10,000 or minus 10,000 until the end of that battle. If your opponent's unit got power minus 10,000, remove one of your Infinity Eyes markers from that rearguard circle and you draw a card. So there is a very sneaky thing that you can do with this ability. You can increase the power of your opponent's attacking unit if you want them to have the ability to hit you. So if your opponent, right, let's say you've checked a damage trigger and your opponent can't hit you, but you want an additional damage for plays in the next turn, when your opponent does their silly little, oh, I'm going to poke you, then they're not going to hit you attack with their rear guard, you can give that unit plus 10k, keep the Infinity Eyes marker, and then prevent yourself from getting damage denied. Just a fun
I mean, if they choose to swing.
If
But
they
yeah,
choose to
like, I
swing.
get
If
what
they
you're
choose to
saying.
swing, yeah. But the thing that we see often, even in competitive Vanguard, is that you will see people do
autopilot.
that little poke attack and just be like, oh yeah, swing. Then you go,
Yep.
okay, cool, give it 10k. You don't lose the Infinity Eyes marker. You lose the ability to be damaged denied by your opponent. And now you also have the potential ability to keep that on there for an additional turn. So you're keeping that Infinity Eyes marker on for a turn that it matters when you need that power to be strong.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's it.
People
So-
autopiloting in Vanguard is definitely like a topic we can talk about later.
Yeah, that's
but
a topic I can definitely add. I think it'll be
the
interesting.
power. Mark is correct in that the power of Levy Dross being probably the first deck in D series that has true tempo control. Like actual control over tempo is really big. I like Levy's new form a lot. I always like the concept of the Infinity Eyes marker. But now that he's got his cross ride, I'm just like, it's just Magnolia 3.0. 1.0 and 2.0 were enough. They're like, screw this. We're going to make King Levy Dress now and Levy Dress. Magnolia 3.0 go, right?
Yeah. No, I agree. I also think that it's very interesting. If you look at these King Levidrus lists, most of the other cross ride decks that got their upgrades or their side grades in this set do not play the original at more than one copy in their ride deck. King Levidrus plays 4 Levidrus because
Because every single one becomes 2 draws.
That skill. They want
Yep.
that skill. And
You
so that is
can
something that's
convert.
going
It's
to
great.
very much influence the power level of this deck because already you're getting 5k off rip. So if there's any other way in this deck to soul charge or to add cards from hand to soul that are not including Levidrus, you're doing that again and you're just adding power. Having this card, Persona Riding, putting an additional Levidrus to soul is plus 20k to your Vanguard and plus 10k to your front row, not including any Infinity Eyes markers you put on your rearguard circles. So it's a pretty scary deck that snowballs really fast and, like you said, has real tempo control over how the game goes.
Yeah, 100%.
There's no doubt about why that deck is seeing so much prominence right now. Like, so far and few between have we played in Vanguard where our grade 3s convert into card draw, basically. Because grade 3 is like, we all know, it's the worst grade in the entire game. That's why they generally put the most powerful cards into grade 3 to make up for them not having shield. But Levy Dras gets access to the exclusive ability to draw for its copies of grade 3s in hand, which is very closely skirting onto why XL2 was so strong. So I was like, well, it's off to the races. It's time to see how good King Levy's going to be when he comes out. I've not been disappointed. I'm
And
very
I think
impressed
that
with him.
This is another instance of when you make it so that an object in Vanguard specifically is not able to be interacted with, it is generally a very powerful mechanic. For
Lock.
instance, lock, right? Set orders. You can't really interact with them. Generally pretty powerful mechanics. We've got Infinity Eyes markers. Dragon Tree, I think, is the only exception because Dragon Tree out powers crept itself within the same set. It was a very odd situation. But generally in Vanguard specifically, when there is a mechanic that you cannot interact with, it is a very hard to balance thing and often can become overpowered. With imaginary gifts, like you said, Excel 2 being absolutely absurd and a huge mistake.
Yep, V is the strongest format our game has ever seen.
Yep.
But yeah,
V
like,
was super
Levy,
overpowered.
Levy, we are very impressed with how it's been doing so far. That deck, admittedly, kind of a joke when it came out with its original 3.
Yeah.
And then they kind of just turned the knobs on it up really big to make the dude, you know, the main player in the anime. I like it. I will continue on with Liel Morta, if we're okay with that.
Go ahead, please.
So, the new Liel ODM. She is now a Dark States unit,
Yes.
and her continuous effect says that while she's on Vanguard, all during your turn, all of your front row get power +5 for each distorted Bane regress gauge. And then its auto ability is that when she attacks Soul Blast 1, choose one card from your rear guard or your hand and throw it into the regress gauge face up, and then she gains the triple drive ability until end of turn. Her divine ability is at the end of the battle that she attacks, if you have 5 or more regress gauges, you drop 2 cards from your hand, and then you gain an additional turn, but during that turn, you get drive -1, and you go straight to the battle phase. You skip your ride and your main phase. Note, you still stand and draw, so there's still that.
Yep. So extra cards.
So, Odium has seen a very large showing from the list that we threw out earlier, and I think this is just one of those scenarios where Liel herself has all of these good effects piled into her, and I think she specifically is the true value deck of the format. You would think that it's Raziel, but Raziel doesn't get real value until you get to 3 or 4 or 5 damage. Liel does not care. She buffs her front row. She gets triple drive for exchanging a card on the field, which, well, when you look into the deck, those cards will come back onto the field. And you don't neg for punching into your deck more.
Yep.
I think that she is the true value deck of the format, and that's why she's so powerful right now.
Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, this deck is really strong. From my opinion.
The other thing about this deck is that this is an important note is that this does give triple drive, not drive +1.
Yep, so the
for
Blitz
those
order
of you
works.
playing Elementaria Sanctitude, this is Elementaria-able. Something very important to remember when you are playing against this deck. And to go into that, just to clarify, the Distorted Bane card specifically, I'll read that off because it's an important piece of this deck.
It is.
Play this if you have a Vanguard with Leal on its card name. You may soul charge 1, put this card face up as your regress gauge. And then auto, when this card is put as your regress gauge, draw a card, choose one of your Vanguards, and it gets power +10,000 until the end of turn. So, in combination with Leal, this card replaces the soul you used, is a free +1, and gives you 10k to your Vanguard when you swing with it.
Yeah, very, very rarely in Vanguard do we actually see set orders replace themselves somehow. Like, you look at the set order color, which is Brantgate, right? And a lot of their set orders, barely any of them draw because, you know, they're used as these, like, field spells to give a little bit of Yu-Gi-Oh! Here. And you work your strategy around them or with them, and that's what makes Brantgate Brantgate. The funny thing about Leal Odium is she kind of threw the middle finger at Brantgate and said, I have none of your weaknesses. And as Mark mentioned, there's no loss of card in hand. You 1-for-1 the order straight up. You gain a soul, so you gain a resource for it. And Leal herself functions as said field spell because she buffs your front row by 5 for all of your Banes. And when you take all of the weaknesses away from Brantgate, and Leal is able to just push in with this high power synergy field with value behind it, it's really hard to start trading well into them until she eventually uses her divine persona turn to just level out your hand to try to go in for the kill shot. The only thing that Brandgate has over her right now, in my opinion, is that they are designed to tutor their set orders out. Whereas, if I remember correctly, her chain only gets her 1. But this is also Dark States. And Dark States, next to Keter Sanctuary, has some of the highest amount of draw and card punch in the entire game to start going through their deck.
Well, absolutely.
Well, I was going to say, the one key thing that, for this deck at least, is that we can, there's a card that puts the order to the drop. And then you can activate it, and then it goes in the regress.
Yep.
So even if you don't have it in your hand, not a big deal.
Yep, because order support for every deck has gotten significantly better ever since DZ came out.
Yep.
And so it's like David was just saying, right? Like, you can pretend that there's only 3 Banes inside their deck. Every single card in that deck that can tutor that card out is just another Bane. And so, as you were saying, it doesn't get too difficult to get the freaking things out.
Yeah, there are At the very least, there is 2 cards that allow you to put a card from your drop as a regress gauge. So there is the Anachronist Dragon, which in the gauge zone, at the beginning of your battle phase, if this card is a regress gauge, counterblast 1, choose a card from your drop, and put it face up as a regress gauge. If you put a card, call this card to rearguard circle. So that is a card that allows you to take that grade 3 early, put it in regress gauge, whatever. For instance, if you have to PG and you have to discard your Bane, your distorted Bane, you can use Anachronist Dragon on the next turn to be able to put that card back in the gauge. It will still activate because you are putting it face up as a regress gauge. So you will still get the ability to draw the card and soul charge of the order. And then you also have an attacker that is very strong. Because when it attacks a Vanguard, grade 3 or greater, if you have a Liel in its card name as your Vanguard, until the end of that battle, this gets 5k. If you have 3 or more regress gauges, Energy Blast 2, choose an opponent's rearguard and retire it. So
Yeah, she's just new Gear Chronicle. Like,
yeah, it is.
Yeah, I mean, literally,
this
the
deck
lore was she went to the Gear Chronicle grave or something and to get the ability.
yeah,
or
she
whatever.
raided their tombs, went right up to Chrono Jet's homies, and she'd be all like, "Hey, I'm borrowing this. No offense."
I'm
Cool.
a grave robber, dog. We good? Oh no, you're dead. Never mind. You can't complain.
And then New Liel comes back after the wish, and she's like, I'm gonna go be a Gear Angel now. Raziel's like, wait, wife. But yeah, like, I think the big thing about Liel with her interaction into the current meta in Japan, from observation at least, it feels like she's a G deck. It feels like she's a stride deck. And she's playing against all of these decks that just twin drive. They all still do cool shit, but her cool thing is that I get to play a different game per se than you do.
Correct.
Because, like, she has her own crest, for one, because that's what she is. Her first ability is literally the Stride Crest.
Yeah.
She gets triple drive like a Stride does. Her own rear guards built into themselves that they can become her 4th attack, like Jet does.
Yeah,
And then
this ride deck is absurd.
Yes, it's very powerful.
So
put a card face up as a regress gauge and draw 2 cards.
It's like Gabe was saying earlier, like compressing your deck really big right now. It's really important for the game. Especially because, rounds in Vanguard and official tournaments has gotten shorter and stuff like that. The quicker you can get to your strategy and the quicker you can spike your opponent, the better you're going to do in all of your tournaments.
Absolutely.
And speaking of tournaments, actually, I was going to say, I think we had a good talk on the decks for set 5 for now. I would say something interesting that we can kind of go talk about was... I mean, are you guys all planning to go to any regionals this year at all?
I'll be going to at least one.
Well, you're going to Philly with us, obviously.
Yeah, I have decided that currently right now, I am really putting a lot of value into Vanguard being social for me. So I'll be going to one BCS, and then as long as one of my friends qualifies for Worlds, which I expect at least one of them.
I mean, at least Peter.
I will be going. Yeah, I will be going to Japan with them. So I'm gonna
actually that's a good
put
plan.
my funds in that basket.
Yeah, vacation, man. That's the excuse.
Well, I was gonna say, I know me and Domino are going to Philly on the same trip, and I know that me, Domino, and Simon are planning to go to Toronto. Is what we're kind of planning right now, right?
Absolutely.
Trying to, yes.
Yeah. trying to figure everything out. Yeah.
It's so interesting with Vanguard being
Well, their promo packs are probably worth the trip. No offense, but.
Well, yeah.
I mean, reselling their cards for like $100 is getting our plane ticket back.
Like freaking that forced scarcity, you gotta love it.
Yeah.
No.
Absolutely.
It's interesting how Mark brings up where BCS is a way to it's like another social avenue, another way to socialize. Because I remember during my time, like 5 years out of the game, I kind of realized, like, damn, man, like I don't really have as much reason necessarily to go out and see people necessarily. Because obviously
card games are a social thing.
Well, it's because
all of us are like hobbyists. Well, it's all of us are hobbyists, right? And that's like the hobby. But then like it really does, like, the BCS is the time to kind of, like, gather other local communities, to touch base with other people, you make friends. Because I still, like, me and David of I Am Vanguard, we made connections with people throughout. Like, when we went to Atlanta, I remember we went to Atlanta, Chicago,
Absolutely.
even all the way to California, with Simon, at
Yeah,
our
yeah.
time in Anime Expo. Like, uh just I think for people out there who are thinking about going to BCS, you don't really have to take it so seriously to think that you have to go there and be hyper competitive. I mean, you can if you want.
Yeah,
Well, that just kind of kills the topic
absolutely.
I was
I
going to
think
talk
that
Just
about,
go out
but
there,
part
play
of
your
it,
best,
right?
have fun, enjoy, try to meet some peeps.
Yeah, and I think that
Well,
that's something that David he mentioned, preparing for BCS, right? I think it's very important to know what kind of player you are
Mhm.
before you decide how you're going to prepare, because I think that there's really three camps you can go into, right? There are the people that are going because it's basically a mini Bushy Road convention, and that's cool, and you get to meet a
Correct.
bunch of other people that play the same
Vanguard
games you do.
bingo.
Absolutely.
Damn.
I think that that's one of the camps. I think the second camp is people who are kind of not sure if they want to play competitively. They enjoy the game.
Yep.
It's still a fun experience,
Yep.
but they're not really sure if they want to kind of get to that next level. And I think that BCS is a really good way to decide and find out if you want to pursue Vanguard as more of your outlet for competition as your hobby, right? And then obviously you've got, for lack of a better term, we'll call them the spikes, right? You've got your people that I want to play this game competitively. I want to play it at the top level. I want to play against the best players in the world. I want to prove to everyone that I am great, my community is great, the people I play with are great. And I think that if you put yourself in one of those camps before you go to a BCS, it will alleviate a lot of the stress. Because I have seen, and it happened to me when I used to play Magic, where I would put myself in that I need to qualify for Worlds. And if I don't qualify for Worlds, this whole trip is worthless. And it just puts so much
Yeah.
mental stress on you. So you need to figure out what kind of player you are, what kind of experience you want to get out of BCS, because the most important thing is that you're having fun. Because at the end of the day, the tournament's free, but it still costs money. You're still spending your time, your money, your effort. All that is going into these tournaments for you if you're going to play in the tournament. So you need to figure out who you're going to be at those tournaments to make sure that you are having the best experience possible. Because the last thing you want to do is use your PTO from your job and be absolutely miserable for 4 days straight. Like,
No,
No,
like
it
Mark
is
is correct.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely make sure you know if you want to be a competitive player. If you don't know, cool. Just go in with the option of like, hey, if I do well, maybe I'll keep grinding.
Yeah.
You'll find out if you
No,
want to
like
keep going competitively after a BCS.
going off of what Mark is saying, right? I think if you want to prepare yourself for regionals, what's important is that you set expectations. You don't set them too high because, well, like many things, you set yourself up to be disappointed. But try to be realistic with the expectations, right? Understand what Bushiroad's intent is with the event and your intent and try to meet in the middle ground. Because as we all know, Bushiroad doesn't really consider or want Vanguard to be too competitive,
Correct.
but that's their side of the story. It's not ours. We decide how competitive we want to be with our hobbies, how much mastery we want over it, how competitive we want to be. And so it's
Nintendo
like Mark
never
was
intended Smash Brothers to be competitive.
Yeah.
careful now. We're here to talk about Vanguard, not fight the Smash community, Gabe. But
Calm down, bro. We just got to hold up a stick of deodorant.
yeah, you don't gotta throw the trebuchet out yet. Wait till we're famous. But the thing about Vanguard is that we, as people who have played for a long time, at least, I have this perspective that I have been fighting with Vanguard with Bushi Road for the last like 10 or 8 years, like basically all through the inception up to V series.
Mhm.
And we had people in our community that were similar minded. We're like, oh, we want to be competitive, we want Bushiroad to take it more seriously and stuff, until it like sort of gets to the point, right, where how much longer are we going to be in this abusive relationship where we keep asking daddy for water and he says, I'm going to go out and get the milk, I'll be back soon. And how many more times do we watch him come back through the door smelling like cigarettes and he doesn't have anything for us? And
Yeah,
so
that's the best metaphor for it.
Yeah, it's like I think like what Mark was saying, and to go off of it, it's really important for us to set expectations for ourselves, what we hope to accomplish there, and then make sure that we don't set ourselves up for disappointment, but we find a sort of middle ground where we know what we want to do, we do our best to achieve it, and maybe we don't, because not everybody can be a winner. And so you just have to understand to be satisfied with your result, if possible.
Correct.
Yeah. No, it's a good thing that you mentioned this, Simon, too, because I remember having discussions with like years ago. I mean, this is like throughout my years, having discussions with with players who are kind of like newish or maybe kind of breaking into, I guess, the competitive scene. And I've even had interactions with people throughout my time running my YouTube channel. And I think the conclusion that, Simon and I talked about this, before about it, but when it comes to like competition, when it comes to being a competitive player, it's not necessarily trying to force yourself to win. I think that's going to put a lot of stress on yourself, as Mark and Simon point out. I think it's more about the enjoyment of embracing the pursuit of getting better. Because generally speaking, if you play well, you build well, and you learn well, you tend to do well. And you kind of just focus on playing the best optimal game of Vanguard you possibly can and find ways to improve and enjoy yourself progressing and learning. And I think overall you will have a much better time enjoying yourself, and at the same time you will improve naturally without you realizing it. So I think it's really how you focus it, because you can't force yourself to win, but at least if you walk away from every game, every round, you want to at least walk away knowing you did everything you thought you could, and maybe leave yourself open for some room for improvement as well. Because I know when I went through my first Spring Fest back in 2012 or 2013, excuse me, that was the very first one. I had some anxiety because I thought, man, I have to win and things like that. But then I think I got to round six, I got eliminated, but I was really excited on like getting back home and getting back in the lab and building decks and studying more with the game, because just that rush of just getting into the competitive feeling of everything, feeling like I'm improving, and you getting yourself a nice good reflection of where you're at. I think just knowing where you at level wise compared to other players you never met before, that could be motivation as well for you. So don't think of it as like a win and loss as a tally, but just the feeling that you get on how everything turns out for you.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like
to
when
piggyback
I
off what you said, Gabe, is you got to think of it as a learning experience, especially if it's your first one, because you're going to learn whether, number one, like you said, is this a game that I want to keep getting better at? Is this a game that I just want to be a locals kid? Or do I want to, go ham, go super crazy?
Or do you want to
Because,
represent a nation, represent a duck?
yeah,
Well, I was gonna say, I think Mark actually kind of hit all the points, so I'm just gonna go how I feel towards the
sure.
going to regional.
Yeah.
So Domino already knows. I've been one of the most competitive players until I quit for a little bit. I took a break when Overdress started. So I've been at the peak. I've been one of those players that go to nationals every year. I'll make top eight every tournament possible. I'll win a lot. Whatever not. But I think if you guys are expecting to go into regionals for Bushy Road, I honestly think that you guys should all just really enjoy the game versus like thinking about winning. Because my experience with the game, I think if you are trying to go in the regionals trying to win, I feel like that you're gonna be more disappointed overall, because overall I think Vanguard's a very fun game, and as you all know, like I quit for a while, but I also I also came back because this game was really fun, and I think that you guys should continue having the mindset that this is a fun game and you want to enjoy your time. Versus I want to win, I want to get the now marker. Which, funny enough, that's actually my reason why I want to go to regionals is the now energy generator, because
go for it.
I have a friend that
Yeah.
really wants it, and Mark already knows
That's
I'm
definitely.
that person that only really plays like competitively if I'm trying to win something for someone else. Like it's not even for
Yeah.
me. I don't even care about these playmats that they give out. I only just go to play to have fun, but like Mark's like, "Hey, David, I really want that playmat. Can you try to win it for me?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'll go," because I won him a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so a
Yeah,
lot of that has to be with the fact that I am approximately an hour and a half from our local, so it's a
Of
little
course.
bit more difficult for me to
And
kind of
I
get
have a
down there
yeah, I
and
have a
just
really love relationship with Mark for many reasons, right? So we
yeah,
he helped
yeah.
me
gotcha.
out, I
Bow
helped him
wow.
out.
Little bit of backstory here. I don't know if Gabe and Simon know this, but when I mentioned earlier that I got back in around 2018 when V Series started, and I went to a
Mm.
unknowing, by the way, I went to a shop challenge, the first shop challenge that a former store had, and I did not do well. I did not really have the basics of the game down. I was just complete casual, and I wanted to buy a Beast Deity White Tiger
Ah,
from
My man.
the store's binder, and I didn't know that there was a format difference between V and at that time it was still called Premium, right? I'm not crazy. I think it was called Premium.
Yeah, it was still premium. They termed
Yeah,
it V
and
premium. Yeah,
the
yeah.
shop owner was trying to sell it to me for like $4 or whatever. And David came up out of nowhere. I'd not introduced myself to him, never had said a word to him that entire day. And he goes, "Are you going to play premium?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "Then you don't need that card. Don't buy that card. It's a waste of your money." And I think that that is something that it made an impression on me to where like, okay, like even though he doesn't know me from Adam, it's like cool that he would take the time to prevent me from spending $4. Like it's $4, right? But the principle of the fact that like a random person I'd never met would kind of be like, "Nah, man, don't waste your money." When he didn't have to, is like so when David came back, I was like, "Dang, bro, you don't remember this, but I like remember you specifically." And
How romantic.
yeah, man, it's totally bromantic and all that.
I mean, once again,
Um,
I just really like the game, and I don't want the players to be taken advantage of. Is my thought process always like even now, like I spend my effort in this game trying to bring in new players. Like if I see them like lurk around and wanting to play the game, I just go ahead and get the trial decks at the store, and I actually just
yeah,
sit down with them and I'll play with them. Like I won't even participate in the tournament, even if well, depends on what Mark wants. But usually I would just sit. Yeah, I would just sit down at a store, play with. Like actually, that's how I got Domino back in the game. Is I was just sit with them like 3 4 hours, just playing the game over and over, like
yeah.
re going through the process. Until he figures it out, and if they enjoy it, I'll just keep playing with them. So
Yeah,
That's the
no,
thing.
that's
Gabe
pretty
felt
good.
the rush of that slot machine again, and he's all like, "Oh man, I'm jonesing
Yeah.
to check a critical here on a restanding
but
Vanguard. I'm
yeah, sorry, I
jonesing
know we
here."
got out of topic, but yeah,
Yeah,
basically,
yeah.
if you want to
But
do go to regionals, I think it's more for me at least. I think you guys should really have fun. But yes, figure out what type of player you are. But
I think it's also important to set expectations
correct,
with the game as well.
yeah,
We have to remember Vanguard, no matter how much we love it and how much we have fun with it, this game is a slot machine. We don't control, for the most part, when
correct.
triggers do or don't appear.
yeah,
So understand there are factors out of our control. It's like lands and magic, just to a higher degree. So
yeah,
you lose to a double crit, you lose to a double crit. You lose to an OT on
Yep,
either side, you lose to an OT.
you have to
Just
accept
take
the
it in stride.
facts.
Yep,
yeah.
put it on the chin.
Variance.
And
Embrace the variance. But yeah, like
absolutely,
I say like you can't control the outcome, but you can control the process. So just focus on what you can control and just kind of let the game just play out itself. I mean,
yeah,
you have professional card players who's like even professional card players of other respective games, even poker, they don't win every single tournament.
yep.
Like there's variance you have to
Hmm.
fight through.
Well, I was gonna
So
say
yeah, go
since
ahead,
we're
Mark.
like already kind of going off on it, I think we can kind of just start talking about our experiences. I mean, we're already kind of doing it, so I think we can just talk about like our experiences with the game, like so far, because I know that me and Domino are very like we're very jumping into the game now. I know like Mark's a little burnt out a little bit, but I know like he's gonna come back. Because that's the main reason why I get him free stuff is like so he feels like he wants to
Yeah,
play again. So basically,
Ah, guilt tripping
yeah, yeah,
your
yeah, yeah. I
wife
mean
into
that
doing
that's
the
how
thing
I
with
that's
you.
how
I
I
like
trapped
it.
him in.
Bribery.
But I would say like
Hmm.
we can talk about some of the experiences that we're having with the game. Of course, like I think negative is good, but I think for me at least, it's more of the positive side of Vanguard because
yeah.
I've dealt through V and I've never played Overdress until Divines. Well, actually, sorry, that's a lie. I played like Last year, I think I started.
You played a
'Cause
little bit. You kind of like dipped your toe back in the water a little bit.
yeah,
You
but
were
I made
like,
top eight every
and then
single qualifier that I just played, and I never practiced out of just the shop qualifiers I came in or your big
yeah,
tournaments that came in.
yeah. I mean, I think for me, right, a lot of what I enjoy about Vanguard has to do with I want to be able to feel like I can play the game,
Yep.
and I want my opponent to feel like they can play the game. So I'm generally, like I said earlier, I play more premium than standard.
Yep.
Just because I enjoy the clan identity more than the nation identity. I think there's more diversity there.
Good
But a
point.
big
Good
thing
point.
right now is where we are in premium. Is it's the three of the better decks, right? You've got Mega Colony, you've got Fenrir, and you've got
Neo Nectar.
Grand Blue, Neo Nectar, and then to a lesser
Yeah.
extent Chaos Breaker Dragon. And the thing about three of those decks is that they prevent your opponent from playing the game in a specific type of way. So like Mega Colony, you lose the ability of an entire mechanic, G guarding. You lose
And you lose
superior
circles.
calling. Yeah, you lose arguably you lose some circles. There's non-targeted resting that just you don't have to, even if you have a resist unit, doesn't matter, it comes in rested.
It was
Um,
literally made to get around resist. That's absurd.
And then you've got Chaos Breaker Dragon. I personally I have played for a very long time.
My old nemesis.
I remember the anime episode where they showed Locke for the first time. And I remember very distinctly looking
That's
at the
broken.
screen, pausing the YouTube video, and going, "This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Why
Yeah.
would they make this
Yeah,
mechanic?"
yeah, yeah. I
Because
remember
the
that
thing-
one episode. Yep.
It is the mechanic of locking is the most infuriating
It
thing to
is.
play against. I have played decks, right, that have really good matchups against Chaos Breaker Dragon or against Link Joker decks in general, and I just mentally burn myself out because they're like, "Oh, Omni Lock, you can't call anything the next turn." I'm like, "Cool. I don't know why I signed up for this tournament. I could be at home right now, eating pizza and like watching TV, but instead I drove to play a non-game, right?" And like,
Mark,
Yep.
I understand you want to punch Gabe in the face right now.
but
it's okay.
I've
Chaos
never
Breaker
wanted to
can't
punch
hurt you
Gabe
anymore.
A day in my life.
He plays Chaos
And then-
Breaker.
I mean, that's fair. And then, the third deck we've got, Fenrir. For those of you that don't know, Fenrir is a deck that requires a lot of mental thought. You call cards onto the board and they replace other cards. It's a very complicated deck. Essentially, it's a mill deck.
Fenrir Loop.
Yeah. So with
Wiseman.
those like three-ish decks being in there, and then Grand Blue is just so far out power scaled
Yeah.
the rest of the format at large. It is not a fun time to play premium if you are a fan of, say, decks Spike Brothers, Great Nature, Aqua Force, right? There are a lot of clans that need to be kind of brought up to that next power level, or the other decks, the bigger decks in the format, need to be brought down a tier. And they need to figure out what they want to do, because right now premium has been about the same format for like 8 months, and that's a long time. And I understand that like Japan doesn't really play premium, because essentially what happened in V series is they got premium, or they got V, and a bunch of the shops just threw away their old stuff. They're like, we don't need it anymore. Trash. Like, there are Japanese players, there's a large segment of that player base still believes that Dragonic Overlord is the best deck in premium. And there are decks like Spike Brothers that do what Dragonic Overlord does, but it's way better. And they refuse to acknowledge it because the format is untouched there. All the innovation that you see in the premium format comes strictly from the West. It does not come from Japan at all.
Before we should probably move on from this, because a premium discussion is much better structured in depth another day, because premium is its own bag of worms, like any format is.
Yeah, there's so much to say with premium.
Well, I would
fortunately,
say,
V is dead. Woo! But
Man,
I do
yeah,
I do agree with Mark, and I think it does suck for premium players.
it does.
That even though I don't like premium that much anymore, because premium, like a lot of legacy formats and card games, has the Infinity Stone problem. I think it's unfortunate that even for people that do like existing in that high power environment, they don't get a lot of sets to shake up their meta every year. And so it can feel like a lot of your games and matchups can get really linear. And that is the first step on the step of death of a card game format. So I just hope that premium can shake out. But we'll save that for another day because premium is just such a long discussion for us to have. Gabe, go ahead. What do you think about your current experience in Vanguard?
Well, I think I touched on it a little bit earlier on because it was actually what's the best way to say it? I definitely when I started playing, of course, David had to get me playing Shoujo Doji as the first deck I've ever interacted with.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! Hold on, hold on, hold on! No, 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 no! Hold on! I asked Gabe. This is not a good deck to play against when you're trying to get in, and Gabe was like, "No, I want to play against the best freaking deck. If I am going
I
to
just want to
regionals."
know. Well, I want to. Well, look, I'm the type of person where, like, if someone says don't do this, this is not recommended. I want to know why, and the way I know why is by doing it myself. So
So
I just
you
did it.
like assuming the position and asking them to do it. You're giving consent, brother.
Sure.
Facts.
Anywho, but like the
Who
definitely the
recorded that?
feel of the game was way different. Because it's like, I mean, obviously I played through every single format in Vanguard just about, and it kind of made me feel like going back to Limit Break era where because Divine feels like where there's not much early game
Yep.
unless the deck is specifically designed for it, but even then it's still usually first one round first turn, second turn, it's kind of very chill. A lot of times it's just swing with the Vanguard, maybe call a rear guard if you want, and hopefully your opponent doesn't trigger. But then once turn 3 comes, everything just changes immediately.
Yep.
And some of the old fundamental strategies I've done before, like guarding, like you still kind of want to guard early, but now you have to be more selective about it.
Yep.
Now, because before, even like in Limit Break era, I remember like I've always stressed like try to guard and keep yourself at like 2 to 3, and then once your opponent limit breaks, you just deal with their limit break. You can no guard their Vanguard that's usually hitting for big numbers and their big rear guards, so
Yeah.
you have more flexibility. But now with Divine, sometimes I find myself going straight 4 to 5 damage immediately, just so that I can have all the counterblasts I need to start blitzing out my turn. It's a huge tempo swing. Divine definitely has a major tempo swing, a lot more tempo swing it seems like. So that's definitely a
Yeah.
big change I've had with Divine overall. But
Yeah.
I like it. I like the ride deck, no great lock. Uh, I think there's some
Yeah, then your
merits to
quality
it.
of life.
Yeah, because I remember I was cleaning up some of my cards and I was looking at my Gauntlet Buster Detonics Drill deck, which was the last deck I played at regionals in Standard, and I kind of missed the idea of like being able to play 2 boss grade 3s and then you have a different one every game sometimes, and maybe the game that you would play the game differently. Whereas
I'm never gonna have
Divine is
Blaster Blade exceed again.
Nope.
no, where like
It's okay. We get
yeah.
Blaster Blade the Vanguard.
True. Blaster Blade, the I am Vanguard.
Man, that
That would
dude,
be
I
great,
I am
three.
literally waiting for that card. But anyways, go on.
No, but yeah, like so Divine is it's a little bit more stagnant.
Yeah.
It's more streamlined, so more consistent.
Yep.
But there's a little bit less variety, in my opinion, on how the outcomes of the games comes. But
Yeah.
it's really it's a pros and cons thing. But I definitely like where the game is right now.
Correct. I'm 100% with you. Like I think
Yeah.
I mean, of course, like before I actually start playing, I only had gears as a deck, so it was kind of boring to be fair, to me, and that's why I didn't really jump in until the other guys were like, "Oh, there's a new set coming out, and it's like a good way to get into Vanguard because you get all the new staples, new decks, new format." I was like, okay. I looked up all the decks and I found a deck I actually really wanted to play and I jumped in, which is Direful Dolls. I'm the only one that still plays it and tops with it at shop qualifiers or whatever still. But it's that's like what really got me into the game deeply is that I found a deck I really wanted to play.
Everybody needs one.
Yeah. Like I felt like that was the deck that I was like, oh, this is interesting. It has multi attack, it has good defense, um, and then it's soul charges. Okay, this is a good deck to kind of get in. So I feel where Gabe is like, divines could be a little like straightforward, but I really feel like that it is probably the best state I've played. Because I never played overdress to be honest, but if I did, maybe my mindset would have changed. But at least like me playing Vanguard for 10 plus years, I definitely think Divines is probably anime is great by the way, and then the format it's not it's actually pretty good.
Legion era though, still best in
Yeah,
my opinion.
Ah,
I think that
Legion.
Legion was
quite
fun, yeah.
frankly, as someone who played a lot of overdress format, quite frankly, I think Divines kind of saved the format.
Yeah,
Before
100%.
Divines, the format it wasn't very
I'll
good.
actually, I think this is actually a good time. I'll interrupt you, Mark, because I was actually going to talk about that, and we can
Yeah,
probably
you're good.
bounce off each other with that because you and I have played Divines or Dress all the way through, if I can remember
Yeah,
correctly, right?
absolutely, yes.
Because like I think a really big thing, as I believe, am I the only person here that hasn't taken a break from the game?
Yeah, most likely.
Yeah,
So going off of that viewpoint to start off, right? We went from G because you know a format's gonna die when they start doing what they did at the end of G. They give us all this overpowered BS because they're
Zero
gonna
Health
nuke the
Dragons.
game. Yeah,
Fuck you, G
and
fans.
so
Zeros and
so you go off of G
Oh,
and their endpoint strides like extra turn
yeah.
gears. Fetus says you can't guard, yada yada.
Mhm.
Into V series, which was a rug pull, to be completely honest on
God.
us. And so you go into dress with pretty low feelings, honestly. Like morale was really low when dress started, even
Yeah,
with the announcement of like the new quality of life mechanics, like the ride deck and everything. They announced the OT, so it's just an instant dampener, right?
yeah,
And then within four main sets, we got what's felt like the endpoint of D series, which was the G4s. And they kind of were. Like, if you weren't playing a G4 deck, you were just square, right? And then set 5 was a throwaway. Set 5 was the glitters. Set 6, which was their next big meta shift, which was Nirvana Jeva and Youthbrick and stuff. They've really sped up the game, yada yada. I agree with Mark in that I think Divines DZ is probably the first time I felt really good about playing the game.
Yeah.
Say what you will about, oh, well, cyclers break deck diversity. A lot of everybody's decks become like the same thing and whatnot. And I have two viewpoints on that. On one viewpoint, I think it's good that a lot of decks will benefit from having powerful generic cards like this. Older decks that don't have very good archetype support can piggyback and hijack these cards so that they feel like they are somewhat relevant in some way, whether in casual or competitive play. And I also agree with the viewpoint. I'm like, yeah, it kind of sucks that a lot of Keter decks are running 12 generic cards or 8 generic cards and yada yada. But playing Raziel since DZ1 came out as like my main pet deck because Bastion hasn't gotten support for so long, I find it really unique in that Bastion uses Keter piles in such a specific and different way because of how generic his effects are. And I think that is the key point of the potential of these generic cards that we all either love or complain about. Is that my viewpoint on them now, after playing with Raziel and playing, well, basically every DZ deck at this point, is that I really like the baseline floor that a lot of the generic staples can provide for a lot of decks because it gives you this feeling of no matter how bad my deck may or may not be built or function, whether by player build, archetype support, Bushiroad hating me, or a combination of all three, that we had don't you speak to me of the blaster archetype, that we have this really baseline level that our generic cards provide for us that becomes comfort, right? Like, it's the upstart goblin thing in Yu-Gi-Oh. All of our cyclers effectively become the card behind it, but they double up as a 5k shield for a cheap poke.
Can
And I
I?
think a lot.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you brought like a really good point, and I was like, you know what? I'm probably gonna forget, so I want to kind of chime in on something. So you know how you
Yeah, go ahead.
mentioned the generics, that a lot of decks run like the generic stuff. So I actually think the generics really do save older decks. Like a good example,
Mm-hmm.
the as much as like it's a deck I like to play, but the Maelstrom deck, that deck was a dead deck until what's it, the festival collection with the donations, all that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
when festival collection came out, that deck became pretty decent, where I can like smack people and go 3-0 for the night.
You feel good playing it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the new
Yeah,
generics,
exactly.
right? Because Maelstrom
Yeah.
discard, so I run the grade one, and then you still run the four recyclers for the recycling purposes and defensive purposes, and then you run the dual nations. Like I run the lettuce in mine just so if I can't persona ride,
Ha.
yeah,
Nice.
because it happens all the time, and Domino knows I have the worst luck in persona writing. So I run the cabbages for my variance purposes, just so I can give the extra rear guards like 5k each. But what I'm trying to say is that I think the whole generic thing is actually a really good idea from my perspective to support old decks. Because, like, for example, like one of our friends that we got into, Daniel, he wanted to play a very old deck that at first I was like, that deck is kind of old. You sure you want to use that as a starting deck? You don't want to play any of the newer decks? And he's like, no, I like the theme. So me and Simon were like cooking up decks. Like I did a Keter dot staple deck, and then Simon kind of added some variances because he knew the deck a bit better than I did. But
Yeah, we ended up in that happy middle point, basically.
yeah, but you know
Yeah.
what's funny is all the decks that been topping been using my list. So I just wanted to prove that out. But I'm just saying that I feel like that these staples are just really good for those kind of decks. Like that's
Yeah.
just how I
I
feel.
I, I think that
Well,
it's
yeah,
it's
because
a
like it
very
brings up the
happy.
base, right?
Yeah, I think it's just a very like you have to toe the line, right? Because like now, if you look at, I mean, this also has to do with like rarity printing as well. But if you look at like Festival Booster, Forward and Revertus, the Dark States Dragon Empire Dual Nation card, which is a huge shot in the arm to every Dragon Empire and Dark States deck that can play the card, is
Yep,
45 ish
45,
dollars.
50.
Like,
It's going up to
45 to
50.
48.
Yep.
yeah, it's a very pricey card, and I think that we're getting to a point again where I think that having these generics is great, but we need these
Yep.
generics to be printed at a rarity where they can maintain. Like, I don't want any generics to be any higher than like $15.
Correct.
It should be
I think that
accessible.
is a really nice kind of price ceiling for cards that people might need,
Yep.
right?
That'll actually be a good thing to go into because we're definitely going to be talking about entry point into Vanguard itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to finish off what we're talking about now,
Yeah, go ahead.
it's like everybody was saying, it's good that the generics are out and that they bring up the deck's baseline. And while I understand from a flavor standpoint, because I am a flavor guy, I still run Leonorn's original ride chain rather than the G1 Roroa, even though I know that's better because I like flavor. Um, I do think it kind of sucks that we are losing out a bunch of our archetype identity and replacing them with just powerful cards that everybody plays. I understand where people come from. But for someone who like constantly plays these bad decks as the person in the room that owns the most Vanguard decks right now, I have come to the conclusion I am completely okay with this now. Like my Tegria deck is playable now. My Brantgate decks, a lot of them become a lot more playable when I put the generics and stuff in them, or I put the order searcher in them. So
Absolutely.
at the end of it, I think it is a really good thing that these generic cards are out. But there's a really big but there. There's a really big but that's even bigger than Thegria's. Mark brought it up. All of these generic cards are in such high demand that their prices are starting to get out of control now.
Yep.
And it's like we were saying earlier, like almost every Keter Sanctuary deck, if it can fit it, will play 4 Biscotti.
Yep.
Biscotti's average at $30 a piece. So even if your deck sucks, like even if your deck is Thegria and that deck sucks,
You still
right?
have to run
You're going to have to
Biscottis.
spend $120 just to get 4 cards for that deck, not counting all the little costs that add up from getting her herself, her grade 1 glitters, etc.
You know what's
And
crazy about that, Simon?
yeah, what's up?
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to chime in here because it brings into something I even talked about with David. Because when I got back into the game 3 months ago, I picked up my Varga deck and I paid about in total, like to get everything optimized, maybe sub $200. Because then I had like sticker shock when I realized effect triggers actually costed money, and I was like, "What? These are like
Yeah.
throwaways," and people pass. But anywho, yeah. So there's that. But it's like crazy, right? So it was like sub 200. I remember when our friend Daniel was getting back into it, I told him because I know he tried to keep everything low budget, which is understandable, and we try to look for decks that doesn't rely on a lot of the pile stuff, the main like staple stuff.
Yep.
Nope.
Like that's why I
everything-
picked up Bolster on the side. But yeah, but in the end he ended up spending like 200.
Yep.
But now if anyone wants to pick up a deck, like let's say Blangdemeyer, let's say Varga, let's say I don't know, any other deck that's fairly competitive and you want to build it as optimal, it's gonna cost you $300+ minimum.
Yeah.
And I remember 2 to 3 years ago when I was kind of dipping my toe into overdress because I didn't see people in a while. They gave me a rundown, and I remember I wanted to build a prison deck, and even with the promo that cost $17 each, I think I was anticipating paying like 150 if I did want to get the deck. So, like Varga is more expensive than it ever needs to be ever, to get into it. So I feel bad on some people who want to play Varga. Blangdemeyer starting to get Blangdemeyer's kind of getting there,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, because all of our sets
um,
are starting to leave their initial print windows now.
Yep.
yeah,
So-
it's just crazy. Like the entry point
Yeah,
for
and
people.
there was a guy in one of our local groups that brought up a really good point. He said it's almost like now in Vanguard, if you think you might potentially have interest in a deck, you got to pick up the cards immediately
Yeah.
I
because
said
Yep.
that. I
you
said
got
that.
yeah. Okay, I was like, I
That
know
was me.
someone had said it
That was me.
originally. Yeah,
If you're on the fence, buy it.
yeah,
Yep.
you have to. There's no choice. Like I've been buying Dragon Empire splits and Dark State splits since set one of Divines because lo and behold, right, my Rokuseis, had I not bought that set two split, Rokuseis are a $25-$30 card now.
Yep.
The card used to
No,
be
they're
$8.
45, bro.
They're
They're 45 to
45?
50 now. They all
Ay,
went up
Dios
after
mío, bro.
the Varga. Yeah, they all went up after the Varga announcement.
And like that's the thing. It's like Gabe said. It's like Domino said. If you look at a card and you go, maybe I'll play it someday, got to buy the split.
Yep.
You got to buy the
Yeah.
support cards immediately. And I think that a issue that Bushy Road games specifically have, right, is that there is a season for actual competitive play where all the prices shoot up. Like I'm
Yep.
sure
Yep.
that a lot of these cards that we're talking about after, I think it's
BCS,
April's the
yeah.
last BCS.
Yep.
I think after April or after May, I think the prices will go down again.
Yep,
But-
October to May. That's when
Yeah,
everything
I
is
just-
at its most expensive.
And it's
Yeah.
literally like you need to either, if you're not going to buy it now, you're going to have to wait,
Yep.
or you're going to have to buy it in the summertime. That's the one like really good thing about Bushy Road having one dedicated competitive season is that there's a certain point where you can buy cards cheaper than they
Yeah,
were.
you can play the stocks better.
Yep.
Yeah.
Unless you're Lyrical Monasterio. If you're Lyrical Monasterio, it's literally the opposite. Get wrecked.
Yeah,
And
it's true,
you said
it's true.
you said the key word, Simon, and it's actually why I actually left another certain card game, which I will not name. But it rhymes with Cheerios. The stock market is definitely what could turn people off because it can, just like every stock market, it could implode on itself, and then
Yeah.
causing a reset. Hence why we got a premium format in Vanguard. But I think it's like, like Mark is right in that if you want these things, you have to invest them in ahead of time. I remember back in Stride era, Stride decks got really expensive too, like $400 to $500. I remember selling
Next
my
stage,
peak.
man.
I remember selling my
GRs.
peak Gear Chronicle deck
Yep.
for like $450, but I didn't invest too much into it because I invest into it in day one. But I remember this was a big problem in Stride era, which I think led to the reset because like it's great if you were there from the beginning to invest, but what if you weren't? What if you're just walking into the game and you want to build this deck and then you realize it's $400 just to build it? that's going to turn a lot of people off. And that's, I mean, how can you convince someone to spend $400 on a what's supposed to be a casual card game?
Yeah.
I really like Gear Chronicle. How much are next stages you play for? Well, they're like $70. I'm not gonna play Vanguard anymore.
Well, even with the Gear Chronicle deck set, right? The deck set, I think the deck set is such a genius idea for Bushiroad. I think they should add more. I think they should do it more frequently, not like a once.
100%.
No, yeah,
thing.
Pack.
It should be
One
more.
thing Bushiroad always gets right. No matter how much I hate them, no matter how much I despise some of their decisions, like we said, low reprints, high rarity slots for staple cards, there's one thing they always seem to get right, and it bugs me that they can't replicate it for the other
Yep.
arms of Vanguard.
The
Their
Trollic.
packaged product is always on point.
Yep.
Every time. Every time.
Make more of those, but
Yeah.
and then obviously like Night Rose, right? I'm sure a lot of us. I know I'm gonna build Night Rose, but then
Heyo.
Night Rose is gonna cost like what, $50, $60? I don't know, 70,
60
whatever.
45 to 60, depending on what your store lists it at, but you are correct, yes.
Yeah, like that's very good entry point for a deck that's ready to play and it actually runs well, has all the main.
It's
staples.
competitive out of the box. It's
Yep.
great.
But then if
Yeah,
you want
it's
to
really good.
upgrade the deck, you're gonna have to pay probably double the value on top of the 70. Just to-
$35 per Largolv, and then you have the grade 1 Neo
Albinas.
Nectar girl. Yeah, she's at like 18 to 22 right now. It's pretty
Landers
nuts.
as an option. Even the Gear Chronicle deck said, "Hey, you want the Verdes, the Dual Nation? He's $50 right now."
Well,
Yep,
to be
it's
fair,
like-
that's how I got it back into Vanguard is actually the Gear Chronicle deck set. Because the guys were convincing me, like, this is a good deck out of the box. I was like, how much is it? $60. I was like, oh, okay. Well, obviously, I got mine for free, but, yeah, I mean, that was my convincing point is that it was so cheap to get back into Vanguard, but then I realized afterwards, like after I bought the gear deck, they're like, "Oh, David, there's like one card you have to get." I was like, "Wait, what do you mean one card? I thought this is competitive out the box." They're like, "No, there's this one card. You got to get swirlers." I was like, "Okay, how much is that?" They were like, "What, $20 each?" When I picked it up, I was like,
Yep.
I had to think about it, right? Because I was like, I just wanted to play casually, so I don't know if I want to pick up swirlers, but Gabe or Domino already knows me, but if I want to play a deck, I want to play it at its best. So
Yeah.
I picked up the 4
Right.
swirlers, so I end up spending like what, 140. I mean, still low cost, but yeah, I mean, I definitely think the stride decks are definitely good entry points for players that want to get into the game. So I really wish like they do more of the like not just I think in Japan they have another deck set coming out for like Varga or Raziel, I believe, or something like that. I saw it in the announcements. If they do some of that stuff, like I think that's what the bigger TCGs do, like Pokemon. They do these like competitive deck sets to get into the game. And I feel
Well,
like
yeah, like,
absolutely genius.
Vanguard does try to do that. It's just,
They
man,
just gotta do it
you
better.
just wish it did it more, right?
Yeah.
I
Like
think
when
that,
they
like,
did the
the-
Graham Grace and the Fafnir and stuff.
Yeah. I think that Pokemon is specifically like an insane anomaly when it comes to the reprinting and the printing of cards.
Yep.
Because how big the corporation is, it's quite literally too big to fail at this point. It is the highest grossing media property of all time. So, like, Pokemon can afford to print a bunch of cards that just plummet the value of the base rarity
Yep.
because there's like 4 rarities for every card.
Yep.
So it's easy for them to do that. Whereas a game like Bushiroad, they can't really do that.
Correct.
Because, quite frankly, Vanguard probably doesn't make a bunch of money. It's most likely like
Weiss is their main
CEO of
money center.
Bushiroad has said before that he would let them take 2 years of his salary before he would let Vanguard die. Like Vanguard
Yeah,
is
Weiss-
Kidani's baby, and like all the things that Bushiroad does, the extra money goes into Vanguard. Like
Well,
their
that was
wrestling
back
companies,
then,
their Weiss
right?
companies, like all the other
Well-
card games. I mean,
Well,
I think
to be
Vanguard.
fair, that was back then. Because now, Bushiroad's most highest grossing card games now are Vanguard and Weiss collectively. Up to the certain point where they've even made jokes like during that famous meeting they had back during Limit Break era when they asked the boardroom if there was one thing you could change about Vanguard, what would it be? And they non-ironically answered, "We wished it was a standard size card game."
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you are correct in that Vanguard in the beginning was really, really on the ropes. We just did not know if we were going to live or not. But then the international popularity of it helped us boost Vanguard a lot. And then,
Yeah.
this, and that happens. Flash forward 10 years later. And now we're here, where Bushiroad as this gigantic empire, which I famously nicknamed as the Disney of Japan because of how many fingers they have and how many pots, is that I think the problem with Bushiroad now is that Kitani cares about this game. There's people in Bushiroad that do care,
Yep.
which is why we can get such solid like packaged products,
Yep.
which is why
Yeah.
when they get the opportunity to make what they want, like a really good example, even though we memed on it when it came out, was the Graham Grace, Fafnir, and the Orphis decks, which
Yeah.
Graham Grace and Fafnir, if you love the game, you love those decks, like I do, sure. What the really big appeal was the reprint of Elementaria and the reprints of staples in them.
Yep.
They know what to do. It's just that I feel like this is one of those top-down things, right, where they just don't get the opportunity to be able to do it. And because Vanguard is so much more available in Japan and they have to mirror Japan's production to come to us, we start going, well, our user base for Vanguard is probably just larger internationally. And that's why the cards are in such higher demand than in Japan. Because
I
in
mean,
Japan, like a biscotti.
Europe, North America,
Exactly.
Australia, Indonesia.
Yeah, right. And it's like, in Japan, a biscotti runs like maybe $8 to $12, depending. Versus out here where it's 30, but that's because we have the rest of what's across the pond is looking for this card, not the island nation.
Well,
And we
Yeah.
start hitting problems that Pokemon sort of solved, where Pokemon just prints more when it's international, and they print different languages for different regions, yada yada, etc. And Vanguard is kind of in this limbo where our English format goes for Europe, it goes for us in North America, and everybody else, like, there are no Espanol cards, is a good way to say it.
I actually have a
Like,
question for all you guys to bring on the table, kind of like bouncing off this with it when it comes to like card prices and stuff. So I know there's some merits to the cases of like, spending a lot of money up front for energy cyclers like, Biscotti, Falheart,
yep,
what are the
that's what I
others?
did.
What are the others? I can't remember the name of the other one.
Tiscar,
Uh,
Biscotti,
Stuff like that.
Brave Shooter, we all know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
so basically, if you invest into the piles, like the nation piles, we'll just call them, you're basically investing into the nation.
correct.
Yep.
So there can be some merit in which,
Yep.
well, this is merit to like if you invest into that, you invest into the nation, so everything going forward will be relatively easy to build. Like if you
Yep.
already have, like one of our buddies is a Storkea simp, so he has all the Storkea staples. So he can build any Storkea deck going forward, and usually the main components, the cores, are not that crazy expensive. So do you guys think it's better? And back in the day, you can maybe spend a lower point into a clan, but there's no investment later
Correct.
necessarily in those cards. Like most of those cards are obsolete. So do you guys think it's better to have something more upfront that can be a better investment later on,
Yes.
but higher entry point, like $200 to $300?
You two should probably get
Or
to
do you
this
think it's
before
better
I
like
do.
that?
Yeah, you two should
But-
probably get to this
yeah.
before I do, because
That's a question I want to put on the table to see everyone's opinion on that,
Um,
because I know there's back and forth discussion on
Okay,
about
so
this.
let's save Simon and Mark for last,
Sure.
because I feel like that you guys have a lot
No,
more
I'll go
say
last.
than
No, I'll
we
go
do.
last. I'll go last.
So
Yeah, I'll go third. That's fine.
I'll go ahead and start. Just because you're the one that brought up the question, and you can probably go second. Gabe. I'm gonna say I think it's an absolutely good investment. Well, the problem is I know this game, right? And compared to what we had before, this is fantastic. From my opinion. But the problem is, as I'm teaching new players recently to get in, I do have to convince them a little bit, saying that the staples are kind of key. But I also think it's not a bad idea though, because in a way, I feel like that if they want to just play for cheap, right? Then they like, for example, like our buddy Max is a very good example. He would
Yeah,
not
sure.
invest in the staples. Same with our other buddy that we just literally gave the stuff to is Marvin. They both wanted to just have fun, right? So they probably spend less than $50 on their decks. The only thing that they really invested in is the effect triggers, for both. They didn't get
Thankfully,
the
they've been reprinting.
yeah. So that was another good thing is that they both really enjoy the state of the game compared to like what we had, but they don't know that. Well, they don't care either, but they don't know that the staples like for the clans that they play are pretty expensive now. But they're okay with it because they're like, well, as long as the other fun guy I'm playing against like doesn't run staples, like we're fair game. But that's the problem is that if they want to go further, I think that will be a problem for them. But I think as a competitive player or like that was in the competitive scene going in now, I feel like that being upfront about the prices on the cards, like for example, like I guess another good thing is like when I picked up the brand gate stuff for really cheap from that one guy that was quitting, and then I resold the stuff for like $300. Yeah, yeah, like it's a lot, but I think if you know what you're getting into, I think it's a good way to rotate the decks, and I think you get more entertainment out of it. Is how I feel because the cores are so cheap. Um,
Hmm.
so overall, that's just my thought on it.
No, it's all good points, and it's interesting how you brought it with Max because I know, like, well, at least with me, I know with me, obviously, just the same as you, David. I think all of us here. If I go into a deck, I don't like to build a deck half-assed. If I'm
Yep.
going to build a deck, I'm going to commit to
Absolutely.
building the deck
Yep.
optimally because to me, it's a waste of time and money. Even if it costs me a third of the price of $300, if I can't do anything with the deck as
Yeah.
good as it could potentially be, it's a waste of money. That's why, like, but so when I committed to Varga, I made my choice with Varga. I got everything I needed. Thankfully, at a decent price. Then I built Blankmeyer because I was still kind of exploring other decks, and I knew my playstyle already. And I made the commitment to upgrade to get the Blankmeyer, but then obviously I get bored and I want other decks, but I didn't want to spend too crazy amount of money. So I was actually looking around other decks that don't necessarily run the expensive pile. So that's why
Mhm.
Welstra looked really attractive to me because it didn't need a lot of the expensive cards and it had its own core to function without needing like expensive stuff. So I know that could be an avenue to recommend to people. Like sometimes there's some builds that don't. While the energy cyclers you could say is a must per se to make it optimized, you could start them off without the energy cyclers. Like for example, Blankmeyer can easily play without Tiskars. It actually can. Do I want to now? If I had the Tiskars, would you play it? Yes, but could you still do well with Blankmeyer or still be able to perform Blankmeyer deck without Tiskars? Yes. And some people could even argue. I know some of our local Blankmeyer players, Blang Bros, we I call them
Blang Bros is
the
The
crazy.
Bang Bros?
Yeah.
Damn.
Blang Bros. But some of them don't even play cyclers because then they rather just even some
Yeah.
Japanese lists don't even play the cyclers or expensive stuff. They just use other stuff, so it's more so it has more options for the deck. So I think there can be ways to do it without it, but ultimately that could be something that they could build towards. But I think it just depends on the player because if it's someone who's just coming into it and just wants to experience playing and they don't care about winning, then you don't have to. But I think a competitive person will go out of their way to get those cards because that's just the nature of competitive people like myself. As far as the investment is concerned, I think it really comes down to, I think Mark touched on it too, and even Simon when you mentioned clans versus nations. Because for me, like for example, I've never played Green in my life. Like Green, the Zoo Nation, I
Yep,
never
me
cared
too.
about it,
Me too.
never played it. But it's changed this technically because I picked up Lascaria because that was cheap, and then I'm gonna play Night Rose, which technically it's a green deck now. Apparently, I was never informed about this beforehand, but yeah, now it's green. But I think it's like if someone just wants to play a particular deck but don't care about investing in the nation, I think it could be a really high entry point for it for them to make it even worth it for them. So I guess it really just kind of depends on that, but I think it is possible to play decks that are budgety but can still perform well. Like Welstra is one I would probably recommend to people if they're not sure what deck to play and they want something that's fairly budget. I say play Welstra. And I mean, there's other decks you can recommend as well, but as far as the investment is concerned, the investment really only matters if you care about the nation itself. Like I'm a dragon person, so I love my Dragon Empire, I
Oh
love my
god.
Dark States. Those are my two for sure. I'm investing in Brandgate kind of, but it was more Brandgate was more because of Chaos Breaker. Go ahead and shoot me in the head if you want, but like I like Chaos Breaker. I didn't really care about any other Brandgate deck. But funny
On
enough,
that note, I'm
yeah.
out.
Yeah. But I picked up Welstra because I liked the deck, but then I actually invested in some of the staples, and now in Poldio, I'll probably give it a try as well because it's kind of like defensive control-y and pressure. I love pressure decks.
Yeah,
So I think overall, to summarize my point, my kind of like my take is if you're a very competitive person to the level that we all are here, you're gonna find a way to get the cards you need.
Yep.
And at the very least, it's not at the level of like other games, rhymes with Cheerios, where it costs like 1,000 to 2,000 to build the deck. We're not
Yep.
there yet. I don't think we ever will be.
yeah.
Um, so I think a competitive person will do it, but will that mean that someone who's more budget in mind will not be able to at least be viable enough to play? I don't think that's
No.
necessarily true, but I do think that there should be, like, just as they're reprinting the effect triggers and they're reprinting elemental sanctitude like 10 million times, I think eventually we will need to get to a point where these like legacy cards basically, well, these cards become legacy. There needs to be a way to without, no pun intended, cycle in these energy cyclers back in to rotation to get them reprinted and maybe like a festival booster or something. But that's
Yeah.
kind of like my summary on it. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, so I think from my point of view, right, the good thing about the energy cyclers, and this is something that a buddy of mine told me when we first got set one, is the good thing about the energy cyclers is that it's good for decks that have 4 empty slots, right? Or decks that don't have support. So, for example, right, you can play 4 um Fall Hearts in Varga, right? But eventually, we're going to get to a point where either Varga uses enough energy that that's not a viable card to play, or there's just such a critical mass of cards in that specific archetype that you really don't have any room for these cycle cards. And I think that we'll get there eventually. The farther along we go in Divines, we will get there with the energy mechanic. More decks now are using them. The support cards are using them now. So we're gonna get to a point where we don't play the cycle cards. For example, right? One of the decks in set 4, a deck I'm most excited for, Equilibra, Destin One of Scales, you can't play cycle cards
Yep.
because
Kagero player
the
after my
way
own
the
heart.
deck is constructed, it needs to have a specific number of overcharge units, and you don't have 4 slots you want to spend on that when you could be spending it on cards that synergize. So
Yep.
with that said, I think that it's a good thing that we have these cycle cards and these staples, because it is like a little, like we said earlier, right? It's just a little, little booster to some
No,
of
it
these
raises the
other
floor.
lesser loved decks, right? But I think
Yep.
that it's eventually it's either gonna needs to be reprinted, or we're gonna get to a point where the cards don't matter anymore. So I think right now it sucks, right? I think if you're just trying to get into Vanguard now, it's not necessarily ideal to play decks fully competitively. I think that
Especially in tournament season.
yeah, I think it's just really rough at the moment. But I think that generally the Vanguard community is kind enough and welcoming enough that I remember we still do this at our locals now, where if someone is just can't afford a card and they're like, hey, look, I can't afford this card, can I like proxy these as that card? We're like, sure, whatever, dude. Like, because then then if you need it. And that's the other thing, is that like when it comes to these staple cards and these expensive cards, play test, because you might think, for example, right, you're a Blangmeyer player, you're like, oh man, I need swirlers, I need Tiz cars, I need forward and revertus, I need blah blah, I need all these expensive dark states cards. And then you look at, you kind of find your style of Blangmeyer. I know Gabe and I have 2 completely different Blangmeyer lists. We have 2 completely different styles of Blangmeyer.
All 3 of us probably have completely different lists, honestly.
Yeah. So I think that you got to really find your kind of style. So get your deck core right. Obviously, buy your cards you need for the deck you want to play, right? Proxy with that. Generally, most decks have 4 to 8 slots available, sometimes 12 if you're really lucky. Kind of tinker with those 12 slots, proxy some cards, play with friends. That's really going to get you the ability to know like what style of the deck you're playing you want to play. Do you need these expensive staples? Which of these expensive staples do you need? That's the big thing for me is like you got to playtest, proxy, playtest, purchase. The 3 Ps: proxy, playtest, purchase. Do those 2 before you purchase. Don't buy cards that you're like, oh, I definitely need these cards. Playtest first. If you have
I'm really
to pay,
happy you mentioned what your P's meant because I had a completely different outlook on
if
what the
you
P's meant.
if you have to spend an extra $5-6 a piece on them, I know it's another $25, but it's more important that you spend that money on cards you need or know you need than to spend, you save $25, but you spent 40 on a card you don't need and you're never going to use it. So at that point you lost $40.
Yep.
And you're going to lose even more money because you're not going to sell it to somebody for what you paid for. So that's my whole thing. 3 Ps: proxy, playtest, purchase.
Like I
to
said,
you.
it's a good thing that you mentioned what the P's meant because I had a completely different meaning for those. But one of the purposes I had about having everybody go first was to make sure we don't reiterate too much over what we said. I think a good point to bring up is something that Gabe mentioned earlier, though, which is early investment into certain nations and stuff like that. And it's part of the reason why I wanted to speak last because I own 32, 34 D series decks. And yes, I spent the money for them. I'm not crazy. The problem is everybody else. But
You serious?
I think that yes, I own 32 D series
Okay,
decks,
go
I
on,
believe,
go
if
on.
not 36.
Continue.
But the thing about early investment as well, I encourage people that if you know you're going to be set in a nation and you're not insane like me, granted I got them all at a good deal, if you're know that you like this nation like how I like Getter Sanctuary, it is a good idea to do, as Mark said, to invest into splits, invest in friends, find ways to be able to obtain these cards pretty early before their jumps, and just sit on them. Just sit on them for as and because you know you're going to play in the nation. Vanguard, like any card game out in the world, is a simulation of a stock market. And Vanguard has finally hit the point that it's no longer our cheap card game that's on the side. Anybody here who's a retro player knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And we have finally hit the point where our staples, our powerful generic cards, are starting to cost as much as like a Magic card or a Yu-Gi-Oh card here and there. And it's a good and bad problem to have. It's a good problem to have because that means that they're in demand. Our card game is in demand, and that gives us future projections for health, and that means we can invest safely, quotation mark, right?
Yeah.
The crappy part is that we were so used to our Vanguard cards being cheap, now we're all like, well, I don't know how I feel about Biscotti being $30, which again brings up the point Mark talked about and I agree with, where we need to find ways to reprint these cards or put them at a lower rarity. I think it is actually legitimately criminal that cards as powerful as Biscotti are not double R. That are as generic as our energy staplers are not double R. I think it is a complete and absolute mistake and a misstep. But that's what gets people to buy sets, is making cards that powerful, that higher rarity. So, give and take, right? Thanks, Bushi Road. If you have an opportunity to be able to pick up a staple, even if it's not in your color, I say from an investment side, you should pick it up. Because even if you don't need it, if you have a community around you, they may need it.
Yep.
And you might make some money, or they might get it from you for the same price you paid for it, and you all helped each other out.
Yep.
For yourself
Yeah.
in the matter, you may do as I have. As I have slowly started gathering all these staples together, there's like 4 on TCG that are lower than everywhere else. I'll buy those. My friends are like, oh, here's an extra Brave Shooter. I knew you were getting pretty slow on picking those up, so here's that. I go, all right, I'll pick that up. And eventually you may hit the crazy point where you basically own a core for every color like I do. And then the deck building possibilities just turn into your discipline and what do you think you want to build. Early investment is good. It's going to hurt. like any entry point into a card game or into a new faction. It's gonna suck. But I honestly really do think with the trajectory Vanguard is going on right now, if you can make a smart investment into powerful staples, generic cards, you just keep an eye out for them. A good example is going to be the grade ones coming out in set 5. Those are good cards to pick up, and they either help you or they help your community. So that's what I got to say on the matter. It's good that the staples are around. It sucks what their prices are at, but now that we're on the flip side of the niche card game where we're starting to increase in price, on the bright side, you know your investment has a payout of some kind.
Correct.
That's a good point too. And I mean, I will tell you, like, I've witnessed a card game from beginning to its death because they overprinted everything way too much to where like it's not even worth buying boxes and product anymore,
Correct.
and that's where the game killed it buried itself. So there is a balance to
Yeah.
be had with
Yep.
these things for it. But I think like for people like getting into this game, uh know your if you come from other card games, because like I think it's best to understand your personal play style, but when it comes to play style, you have to really understand your tendencies as a player. You know, are you more prone to call to are you more prone to being more aggressive? Are you not afraid to maybe expend more resources for a higher offensive payout? Are you more conservative, more defensive? Do you like seeing things die, retire, and lock? You know, are you a control player like how I am? Because I know I'm a control player and I like tempo decks and decks with a lot of pressure. So that's why Varga and Blangdemeyer fit my description, and I'm okay, and I feel confident in investing in Dragon and Dark States because I know that there should always be a deck for me that I'm interested in. So as long as you find a nation that clicks with you and you understand your tendencies as a player and find something that clicks with you, it shouldn't feel too bad in the long run getting into it. And if you're not even sure if you want to continue playing the game in the long run, you know, you don't have to spend $300. Start low.
Yep.
You know, start with the cheap version of something.
Yep.
Maybe look for a deck list. Look for a deck. Like again, let's say Brantgate, right? Maybe you're getting into Brantgate. Play Welstra because if you look at Welstra lists, like they don't really use a lot of those expensive cards in their pile. There's that one promo card, but you could look for stuff like that. I remember when we got our buddy Max back into it, he likes Vermilion, and Vermilion's cheap, and Vermilion doesn't even require some of the expensive stuff like Foul Hearts. So you can find, even back in the day with Vanguard, there's always more budget viable options as well. So you could still start small and then work your way up. But don't think that you can go get a deck that's established as one of the best decks and every single winning list has these main pile of cards. Don't like, you know, drop the 180 to 200 instead of the 300, and then the deck doesn't function as well without it. Like, you know, like Raziel, I can't imagine a Raziel list without the Biscotti and Saragon, the dogs.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine it without it. So I don't know. That's kind of like my opinion on it.
All right. So, as much as I would love to talk more, I did have a set time of hour and a half to 2 hours, and we're gonna hit that 2 hour mark. So no, and I really love this, and I think that the more that we talk, I feel like we're gonna run out of topics, which I don't want. So I would save it
Yeah.
for next week, which I am planning to post every week. So I was gonna say, Simon has a separate locals. We all have the same locals. So Mark, you want to give a shout out to your local shops, and then Simon can, and then we'll kind of wrap it up from here, and then we'll do another one next week.
I'll go last on this one. You guys should do your local shout outs
Well,
first.
we all go to the same locals, so
Yeah.
Yeah, so go ahead and shout out your shops.
Oh, fine. I guess we'll go first. So, shout out, Curio Caverns. There's like 4 locations in Virginia.
yep. Two
Shout
of them do
out.
Vanguard, right?
Yeah. Yeah. 2 of them do.
I didn't know there were 4.
Shout out. Technically, this isn't your guys' locals, but it's closer to me. Technically, shout out Superstar Card Gaming.
Yep.
Token
Great shop.
MTG as well. That's another great shop too. And then shout out Boba Hero as well. I think there's 2 Boba Hero locations.
Just one, and then the other one is in Woodbridge, which is Anime TCG.
Okay.
So yeah, those are our locals around here. So if you guys are around Virginia, plus, please stop by. And Simon, you want to give a quick shout out, and then we'll all say bye.
Maryland too. Those shops are in Maryland as
Oh,
well.
Greedy Goblin
Yep.
in Maryland as well. Yep.
Greedy Goblin, yeah.
Our home shop in Utah that we play at in the Valley in Salt Lake County, that is going to be Mythos Games and Mythos Games or Mythos.games. They're a great shop. They have great customer service. So if you ever want to buy anything on their website, they will treat you well. And you can call in as well. They've always got it. And a shop run by my personal friend that runs Vanguard a little bit south of us for the other community, The Fun Collector at thefuncollector.net. Their man Hafet is always taking care of me. He's always taking care of the guys down there. Also runs an online shop. So if you're ever online or if you're in the state itself, do try to visit them.
Awesome.
All right. Well, hey guys, thanks for listening, and we will be back next week with a different topic.
Totally.
For sure. All right. Bye, guys.
Okay, bye.